It's 2001. The iPod is revolutionizing how we listen to music. Alicia Keys is topping the charts with Fallen, and Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone is smashing box office records. But as pop culture buzz reached its peak, something far darker was unfolding in corporate America. It's December 2nd, 2001. The nation is still reeling from the horrors of September 11th, when Enron, once the seventh largest company in the United States and celebrated as America's most innovative for 6 straight years by Fortune magazine, files for the largest bankruptcy in U.S. history at the time. $63 billion in assets vanish in a single day. How did a company that Wall Street worshipped become one of the most infamous corporate frauds in American history in the blink of an eye? The answer lies in one of the most sophisticated webs of lies ever built inside a major American corporation. Today we follow the lies from glowing quarterly reports to the smoke and mirrors empire that eventually collapsed under its own weight. Welcome to Follow the Lies, Fraud and Deceit Uncovered. I'm Kevin Barrows. I've spent decades investigating how deception can hide inside legitimate-looking businesses, and cases like Enron show exactly how that happens at the highest levels. What makes Enron especially compelling is how smart, ambitious people convinced themselves and everyone else that the old rules didn't apply when the stock price kept climbing and the bonuses kept growing. I've seen similar patterns in my own work, and it never ends well. Massive corporate frauds like this also trigger enormous waves of investor lawsuits. In fact, I was peripherally involved in helping produce digital evidence for some of those litigations, and I can tell you the scale of the lawsuits that flowed from Enron was almost incomprehensible. If you've enjoyed these deep dives into real fraud cases, please hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an episode. And if you want a practical tool to help you spot deception in your own life, download my free guide, 7 Proven Strategies to Spot Lies and Uncover the Truth in Any Interview, at followtheliespodcast.com. Let's start at the beginning, with a company that went from Wall Street darling to one of the biggest corporate frauds in American history. Enron began in the mid-1980s as a relatively ordinary natural gas pipeline company, the result of a merger between Houston Natural Gas and Internorth. But under the leadership of CEO and Chairman Kenneth Lay, it quickly transformed into something far more ambitious, a company that wanted to dominate the newly deregulated energy markets of the 1990s. Lay had a bold vision: turn energy into a tradable commodity, just like stocks or pork bellies. Enron positioned itself as the smartest guys in the room, a cutting-edge energy trader that could buy and sell anything, anywhere, at any time. The real engine behind Enron's meteoric rise was an accounting innovation called market-to-market. Instead of waiting for actual cash to come in from long-term contracts, Enron booked the projected future profits the moment a deal was signed. If the numbers looked good on paper, even if the project might never make a dime, those projected earnings were counted as current revenue. This allowed Enron to report enormous profits year after year, even when real cash flow was weak or non-existent. To hide the growing mountain of debt and losses, CFO Andrew Fastow and his team created hundreds of special-purpose entities, off-balance sheet partnerships with names like Chuco, LJM, and the Raptors. These entities borrowed money on Enron's behalf and absorbed the company's losses, making the main books look healthy and profitable. The partnerships were often funded by Enron's own stock, creating a circular illusion of value. It was financial engineering at its most creative and most deceptive. The culture inside Enron was intense, aggressive, and cutthroat. Employees were ranked every 6 months in a brutal system known as rank and yank. The bottom 10 to 15% were often fired on the spot. Executives were rewarded with massive bonuses and stock options for hitting or beating earnings targets, no matter how the numbers were achieved. The mantra was simple: make the numbers, pump the stock price, and get rich. This intense environment turned Enron's headquarters into a pressure cooker. Traders had televisions tuned to CNBC all day, watching the stock ticker like it was a scoreboard in a championship game. The higher the stock went, the bigger the bonuses. The bigger the bonuses, the louder the parties. People who worked there during the peak years all described the same thing. A culture where asking too many questions about how the profits were actually being made was seen as disloyal, almost unpatriotic to the Enron way. Everyone was rich on paper, so why rock the boat? Performance reviews weren't about ethics or long-term sustainability. They were about delivering the numbers Wall Street wanted to see. For years, it worked brilliantly. Its stock price soared from around $10 in the early 1990s to over $90 at its peak. Analysts loved the company. Arthur Andersen, one of the world's biggest accounting firms, signed off on the books year after year. In 2000, Enron was named America's most innovative company by Fortune magazine for the 6th year in a row and ranked 7th on the Fortune 500. But the lies were piling up faster than anyone outside the inner circle realized. Debt was hidden in complex partnerships. Losses were disguised as profits. Risky deals were booked as guaranteed wins. Executives were selling millions of dollars worth of stock while publicly assuring employees and investors that the company was stronger than ever. By the summer of 2001, the cracks were becoming impossible to ignore. CEO Jeffrey Skilling suddenly resigned in August, citing personal reasons. Whistleblower Sharon Watkins wrote a now-famous memo to Kenneth Lay warning that Enron could implode in a wave of accounting scandals. Her concerns were largely brushed aside. As executives tried to unwind some of the shady partnerships, the truth started leaking out. Suddenly, no one wanted to lend Enron money. Credit ratings were downgraded. The stock price collapsed from over $90 a share to less than $1 in a matter of weeks. On December 2, 2001, Enron filed for bankruptcy. It was the largest corporate bankruptcy in U.S. history at the time and exposed one of the most elaborate webs of financial deception ever constructed. A company that had once symbolized American innovation had been built on smoke, mirrors, and a mountain of hidden debt. The house of cards didn't just fall, it imploded, taking with it the life savings of thousands of employees and the trust of millions of investors. The collapse of Enron in December 2001 triggered one of the largest and most intense corporate investigations in U.S. history. Within days, the FBI, the SEC, and multiple congressional committees launched full-scale probes. What they uncovered was staggering in both scope and sophistication. A carefully constructed web of deception years in the making. And financial documents that showed executives had known for months, in some cases years, that the company was in serious trouble, yet continued to publicly reassure investors and employees that Enron was stronger than ever. Investigators quickly zeroed in on internal emails, memos, and financial documents that showed executives had known for months, in some cases years, that the company was in serious trouble, yet continued to publicly reassure investors and employees that Enron was stronger than ever. The contrast between the private panic and the public confidence was shocking. CFO Andrew Fastow emerged as a central figure in the fraud. He had personally profited tens of millions of dollars by creating and running the off-balance sheet partnerships that hid Enron's massive debt. These entities were designed to make the company's books look healthy while shifting enormous losses off the main balance sheet. Fastow even named some of them after his children, a detail that later came back to haunt him in court. Watkins, a vice president in Enron's accounting department, provided one of the most damning pieces of evidence. Her August 2001 memo to Kenneth Lay detailed her concerns about the special purpose entities and aggressive accounting practices. Her warnings were ignored or met with internal investigations that focused more on keeping her quiet than addressing the problems. Meanwhile, Enron's longtime auditor, Arthur Andersen, came under intense scrutiny. As the company's troubles mounted, Andersen employees were allegedly instructed to shred thousands of documents and delete emails related to Enron. The firm later claimed it was following its document retention policy, but prosecutors saw it as obstruction of justice. Arthur Andersen was eventually convicted of obstruction, a conviction that was later overturned on technical grounds. But the once mighty accounting giant never recovered. Now let's go inside the investigation, where I provide insight on how these major corporate cases actually get made. Many of the biggest fraud investigations start with a whistleblower. a company insider willing to report wrongdoing. In Enron's case, that person was Sharon Watkins. Her memo to Chairman Kenneth Lay was one of the earliest clear internal alerts. At the time, corporate whistleblowers had virtually no legal protections and no financial incentives. Congress would later create both. But Watkins faced significant internal pushback and criticism for sending an internal memo instead of going straight to law enforcement, a decision that, in hindsight, may have cost investors billions. What jumped out at me when reviewing the evidence years later was how many smart people inside the company saw pieces of the puzzle but chose not to put them together. Some were afraid of losing their jobs. Others had stock options worth millions and didn't want to kill the golden goose. A few genuinely believed the company would turn it around if they could just buy a little more time. That kind of willful blindness is something I've seen repeatedly in major fraud cases. Good people convincing themselves that the problems aren't really that bad, right up until the moment everything collapses. The criminal investigation revealed a pattern of deliberate deception at the highest levels. In the end, dozens of Enron executives faced charges. In one of the most high-profile white-collar trials in history, former CEO Jeffrey Skilling chose to take the stand in his own defense. On direct examination, he was confident and professional, walking the jury through complex financial details. He proclaimed he was absolutely innocent and said he resigned only because he was worn out and troubled by the falling stock price. But on cross-examination, his demeanor changed dramatically. When pressed on key decisions and warning signs, Skilling repeatedly answered with some version of, "I don't recall." Observers and jurors later remarked on the stark difference between the two versions of Jeff Skilling they saw on the witness stand. Skilling was convicted on 19 counts of fraud, conspiracy, and insider trading, and originally sentenced to 24 years in prison, later reduced on appeal. Kenneth Lay was convicted on multiple counts but died of a heart attack before sentencing. Andrew Fastow cooperated with prosecutors and received a 6-year sentence. The scandal rocked corporate America. It exposed how an aggressive growth culture, combined with weak oversight and complex financial engineering, could allow massive fraud to go undetected for years. What made it especially disturbing was how many smart, well-educated professionals, accountants, lawyers, bankers, and executives, either actively participated in the deception or chose to look the other way as long as the stock kept soaring and the money kept rolling in. Congress responded with sweeping reforms. The Enron case became a textbook example of how deception at the highest levels can destroy not just the company, but the livelihoods of thousands of ordinary employees who had placed their trust and their retirement savings in the hands of those at the top. Enron wasn't brought down by one bad actor. It was a toxic culture that rewarded aggressive accounting, punished anyone who asked tough questions, and celebrated short-term stock price gains above everything else. The lies were sophisticated, hidden behind complex financial structures and jargon that most people, including many on the board of directors, simply didn't understand. Whether it's a massive corporation like Enron using sophisticated accounting tricks, or smaller companies hiding behind layers of offshore entities, the pattern is the same. Complexity becomes a shield. That's why, during investigations, I never accept "it's too complicated" as an answer. You have to peel back every layer through records, interviews, and persistent questioning, even when it's difficult and time-consuming. In Enron's case, too few people inside the company were willing to peel back the layers. The consequences were devastating. While thousands of employees and retirees watched their life savings evaporate when their 401ks, heavily loaded with Enron stock, became nearly worthless overnight, many of the executives who knew the truth had already quietly cashed out hundreds of millions in stock options. What made it worse was that this wasn't just a financial collapse. It was a profound betrayal of trust. People who had given decades of their lives to the company lost everything, while those at the top protected themselves. The public outrage was immediate and intense. Congress held high-profile hearings. The media ran wall-to-wall coverage. People demanded to know how something this massive could happen in broad daylight, and why so many smart, well-paid professionals had either participated in the deception or looked the other way. In response, lawmakers moved quickly. Just months after Enron's collapse, Congress passed the Sarbanes-Oxley Act of 2002. one of the most significant pieces of corporate reform legislation in decades. Often called SOX, it was designed as a clear message: never again. Among its most important provisions, CEOs and CFOs were now personally required to certify the accuracy of their company's financial statements, with serious criminal penalties if they signed off on false numbers. It created the Public Company Accounting Oversight Board, PCAOB, to oversee auditors and end the cozy relationships that had allowed firms like Arthur Andersen to sign off on clearly fraudulent books. It imposed stricter rules on auditor independence, mandated longer retention of records, and strengthened whistleblower protections, so employees like Sharon Watkins could come forward without fear of retaliation. It also increased criminal penalties for securities fraud and obstruction of justice. Sarbanes-Oxley fundamentally changed how public companies operate in America. It forced boards to be more independent, required stronger internal controls, and made executives personally accountable in ways they had never been before. While some critics argued it added costly bureaucracy, most agreed it was a necessary response to restore confidence in the markets after the Enron and WorldCom disasters. On the deception spectrum, Enron sits at the very high end. Systemic institutional fraud that infected an entire company and shook confidence in corporate America for years. It remains a powerful reminder that when companies prioritize appearance and short-term gains over transparency and long-term sustainability, the consequences can be catastrophic, not just for investors and executives, but for everyday employees and retirees. The collapse of Enron didn't just destroy a company. It destroyed lives and left a generation of workers questioning whether the system was rigged from the very start. That's why its lessons are still so relevant today. The same pressures, aggressive growth targets, massive bonuses tied to stock performance, and complex financial engineering continue to exist in corporate America. The names and industries may change, but the fundamental danger remains. When deception becomes normalized at the top, it eventually trickles down to everyone. Each episode, I'll share a lie detector tip, a practical field-tested technique to help you cut through deception and protect yourself before things go wrong. Today's lie detector tip is about how complexity is often used as a weapon to hide fraud. I've seen this tactic used time and time again in investigations. When a company's financials become so complicated that even smart, experienced people struggle to understand them, or when executives respond to reasonable questions with, "It's too complex for outsiders," treat that as a telltale sign that something is wrong. In the Enron case, market-to-market accounting and hundreds of secret partnerships created a maze so intricate that debt and losses simply disappeared from view. The more complex the structures became, the easier it was for executives to hide the truth while continuing to report glowing profits to Wall Street and their own employees. Here's the practical takeaway. If something can't be explained clearly and simply, dig deeper or walk away. If you're evaluating an investment, demand to see the actual cash flow, not just projected future earnings. These are only estimates. Ask the tough follow-up questions. What happens if these projections don't pan out? What are the real risks? Where is the actual money coming from? If the answers get more complicated instead of clearer, or if the person gets defensive, that's often a telltale sign that something is being hidden. Because real success and real value don't need to hide behind layers of complexity. Genuine businesses and honest deals can usually be explained in plain language, using real numbers that make sense. I'll bring you more of these practical tips in future episodes. From America's most innovative company to the largest bankruptcy in U.S. history at the time, the Enron story remains one of the most powerful warnings about what happens when lies are allowed to grow unchecked inside a company. What made it especially tragic is that this wasn't just a financial collapse, it was a profound betrayal. Has a company, investment, or business deal ever raised red flags for you because the numbers didn't quite add up, but the story felt too good to be true? I'd very much like to hear what happened. Send your story to kevin@followtheliespodcast.com. It might even become a future episode. If you want a practical tool to help you spot deception more effectively, whether you're evaluating an investment, reviewing financials, or navigating high-stakes conversations, I created a free guide called 7 Proven Strategies to Spot Lies and Uncover the Truth in Any Interview. It's short, straightforward, and based on techniques I've used in real investigations. You can download it right now at followtheliespodcast.com. If you're enjoying these deep dives, please hit subscribe, leave a rating and review, and tap the bell so you never miss an episode. Thanks for listening. Until next time, follow the lies.